Hey guys, tonight we're heading deep into the gently humming heart of a Song Dynasty fortress. A place where warfare was treated less like an action movie and more like an engineering school field trip. Picture the moon rising over the outer ramparts, the sky tinged with brushstroke clouds. And beneath your feet, stone paths so precisely laid you could roll a marble from one end of the courtyard to the other without it stopping. You're not here for a battle, not really. You're here to watch a group of tranquil, slightly over-caffeinated engineers politely outthink their enemies. Spoiler alert. You probably wouldn't last 5 minutes in this war of maps, and mild passive aggression. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. I love seeing those roll in. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake to the sound of a brush dragging across parchment. Outside, the fortress is calm, so calm, in fact, that the loudest thing is a bamboo pen sketching wall angles on a rice scroll. You've been invited to observe the Song Dynasty's most cutting-edge siege engineers. And the mood is unexpectedly cozy. There's tea, of course, already steeping in a ceramic pot balanced on a sun-warmed tile. An old man named Qian hands you a tiny clay cup and gestures for you to sit beside a miniature-scale model of the fortress, tiny wooden battlements, soft silk threads for ropes, and a clay figurine that looks suspiciously like you, wobbling near the edge. Today, Qian says, we plan where not to build. This is the Song Dynasty, circa the 11th century CE, and they take their sieges seriously, but not loudly. No barking orders, no clanging metal. Instead, it's all done through diagrams, whispering debates, and the occasional slap of a folding fan when someone disagrees with a measurement. You sip the tea. It tastes faintly of cinnamon bark and anxiety. Historians still argue whether the Song's approach to siege defense stemmed from Confucian ideals of harmony or just an extremely practical disdain for unnecessary mess. Either way, what you're seeing is warfare as domestic art, structured, calm, oddly soothing. You join the team of engineers on a gentle walk around the outer walls. These are not brute force men. They wear ink-stained tunics in russet and soft indigo, with hair pinned by copper cones rather than helmets. One leans against a battlement, holding a scroll with an annotated grid. This section is too proud, he murmurs, tapping a corner of the wall. It needs humility. You blink. You mean, it's too tall? He nods sagely. Exactly. The phrase he used, shu shen, or modest heart, is apparently how they refer to architectural adjustments. They're planning to slightly lower part of the wall so that incoming wind doesn't create pressure pockets that could aid enemy scaling ladders. It's the kind of detail you'd expect from a garden designer, not a war planner. You ask where the weapons are. They point to a series of baskets beside a shaded corridor. Inside, spools of twine, waxed paper, pulleys, and folded bamboo. It's like someone robbed a kite workshop. But Qian assures you, everything we need to win a siege is here. A boy jogs past with a wooden box marked in calligraphy, spare fulcrums. You follow the engineers into the observation tower. From here, you can see the surrounding plain, a vast stretch of golden farmland slowly shifting into dust. They don't worry about sudden attacks. The Song preference is to see their enemies coming days in advance, and to make sure they stay confused the entire time. On the tower's inner wall is a painted mural, colorful, stylized, and oddly childlike. It shows a past siege in which a single engineer rerouted a stream to flood an enemy tunnel. The water's painted with cheerful koi and one clearly panicking soldier. You're told it's based on a true event, although the koi are likely artistic license. A younger engineer named Dai squats beside you, unrolling another scroll. If they come from the west, he says, we flood the rice fields. If from the south, we lift the fog curtain. You raise an eyebrow. Fog curtain? Evaporation traps. You'll see. You really hope you will. As night falls, the entire team regathers to make minor edits to their morning's plans. Candles flicker in protective jars. The engineers talk softly, like monks in debate. One keeps scribbling variations of the character for pause onto a margin. Just before you doze off on a stack of sandbags, Qian leans over and pats your shoulder. You're learning. says, "You didn't ask about swords even once today." You smile sleepily. He adds, "Tomorrow we teach you why our walls sing at night." You drift off wondering if that was metaphorical, or if the fortress really does hum. The next morning, you wake before the sun, roused by the gentle swish of brushes and the muted thud of sandbags being shifted. Qian is already awake. He always is. Seated cross-legged beside a bucket of freshly soaked rice paper, painting what appears to be a strange pattern of overlapping waves. "These are the resonance points," he says without looking up. "Every stone wall sings. We just encourage it." You rub your eyes. "That wasn't metaphor?" He raises an eyebrow. "You slept well, didn't you?" You think back. You did sleep surprisingly well. Despite the stone bedding, the faint chill, and a goat bleating faintly in the courtyard. More on him later. There was a kind of rhythm to the place. A subtle thrum, like distant temple bells filtered through layers of linen. Today's lesson is about acoustic siege defense. You're led down a winding corridor that curves slightly inwards. Its walls embedded with bits of ceramic, hollow boards, and strips of metal. One engineer walks ahead of you, clapping once every few steps. The sound ripples back in peculiar patterns, like it's being folded and returned with added texture. "These passages are designed to confuse sound," explains Dai. "Marching feet can't echo properly. Archers lose timing." You pass a small chamber filled with inverted pots hanging from the ceiling by hemp rope. Apparently, when the wind hits just right, they create tones similar to dragonfly wings. You're skeptical until Qian taps one with his fingernail and the resulting hum makes the tiny hairs on your neck stand up. Historians still debate whether these techniques had measurable tactical benefit or were mostly psychological, designed to unsettle enemies, or at least make them question the feng shui of their war strategy. There are even accounts of invading soldiers fleeing after reporting that the fortress breathed. In the main courtyard, the engineers are setting up today's key demonstration, the listening well. It's a dry pit, lined with polished stones, with a suspended bamboo bowl in the center filled with water. You're told that by watching the ripples, one can detect tunneling, enemy efforts to dig beneath the walls, long before any shovel breaks the surface. But only if you listen long enough, says one elder. You sit beside the bowl and watch. Nothing happens for 20 minutes. Then, just as your eyelids start to droop, a faint concentric ripple appears, barely visible. Qian chuckles softly. "That's you, by the way. You shifted your knee." Ah. Lunch arrives wrapped in lotus leaves, sticky rice, pickled mustard root, and a preserved plum that looks like it's been contemplating the nature of time. You eat with the engineers beneath a gently swaying canopy. Everyone's talking about a new pulley design that lets one person raise a 20-foot shield wall using only their body weight and a system of weighted jars. "This is what happens," Qian says, "when your city makes more scholars than swordsmen. There's an easy pride here, and a lack of bluster." You ask about that. He nods. Song generals must memorize Confucian texts before they touch a blade. War is last, always last. You're starting to understand. The defense isn't just in the walls. It's in the culture, steeped in patience, intellect, and the belief that if you can trick an enemy into walking in circles long enough, they'll eventually get bored and go home. The afternoon is spent studying the Phantom Gate, a carefully constructed false entrance that looks fortified from a distance but collapses into a pit trap and cross. It's been disguised with painted cloth, pine ash, and chicken feathers. Don't ask. You nearly fall into it during your demonstration. Talking gentle laughter from the team and one very smug goat. Did we mention the goat? He's technically Qian's, though no one controls him. He wears a scrap of silk tied around one horn and seems to attend every planning session, chewing on blueprints and occasionally rearranging stones with his hooves. "That's Commander Tuck," says Dai solemnly. You nod. "Of course it is." That evening, you sit on the parapet wall, watching the sunset paint the sky in strokes of saffron and plum. A group of engineers rehearse semaphore signals using fans and colored flags. Their movements precise, graceful, oddly poetic. Down below, children play a game that involves tracing siege patterns in sand with their toes. One girl explains, "If you can draw the fortress from memory, you're allowed to build one from snow tomorrow." You smile. That tracks. As night falls, the walls begin to hum again. It's subtle, like wind caught in a flute, but unmistakable. Qian joins you, sipping tea. You hear it now? You nod. He leans closer. The walls listen too. You're not sure what that means. But you believe it. You wake to the sound of wood being sanded, slow, rhythmic, meditative. Somewhere outside your quarters, the engineers are already at it again. And the scent of pine resin hangs in the air like a lazy incense trail. You stretch under your cotton blanket, still half astonished at how comfortably you've settled into this world of measured footsteps and murmured calculations. By the time you step into the courtyard, a new project is underway, the testing of whistling arrows. The archery team stands at attention, bows polished to a dull bronze sheen, each arrow tip modified with hollow bone reeds that emit a keening cry when loosed into the sky. The purpose, you're told, is not just intimidation, but communication. You can code a message in pitch and pattern, says one instructor. One long whistle, too short, pause, retreat. You raise an eyebrow. Wouldn't it just be easier to shout? He grins. Try shouting across a battlefield full of drums. Point taken. You're ushered next into the signal tower, where a massive bell, cast from a single bronze core, sits waiting. Its tone, when struck, resonates through your spine like thunder wrapped in silk. One tone means reinforcements needed. 2 for fire. 3. Well, let's hope you don't hear 3. Above the bell is a set of interlocking shutters, operated by ropes and counterweights, allowing messages to be flashed across the horizon using sunlight. It's a kind of luminous Morse code, and you're allowed to pull one lever yourself. You signal the character from P. Someone in the next tower replies with, soon. This fortress is a symphony of coordination. Even the kitchens are designed with intention. Long clay flues that carry heat from a central hearth to 6 different cooking pots, conserving fuel and warming the stone benches beside them. As you sip your morning broth, earthy, slightly smoky, with a suspicious hint of ginger, you notice that even the bowls are standardized to a particular size. Easier to stack in the armory. Qian explains, just in case they need to become helmets. Historians still argue whether Song Dynasty fortresses were truly as sophisticated as some records suggest. Skeptics point to the stylized brushwork of Song-era paintings, claiming they romanticized these engineers into philosopher warriors. Others argue that the real innovation lies not in their machines, but in their mindset. Peace first. Always peace first, but prepare artfully in case it fails. Today's demonstration is more dramatic. A simulated siege is underway. 2 teams. One defending the gatehouse, the other tasked with breaching it. You're given a red sash and told you're on team breach. Your tools? A battering ram, 2 smoke pots, and the aforementioned goat, who has joined your squad uninvited. The defenders, naturally, have built a retractable bridge that folds inward like a fan, rendering your ram useless. A boy with a flag signals a new defense mechanism, jars of powdered lime, thrown from above to create blinding dust clouds. You are not prepared for how much it stings, or how much the goat enjoys it. Amid the chaos, you sneak off to the observation platform, where Qian is watching with a grin. Sometimes, he says, we defend better when we're not trying to win. You squint. That's not comforting. He nods. But it is wise. You take a break on a carved bench in a shaded alcove, where calligraphers are inscribing today's events into record scrolls. The ink smells of pine soot and vinegar. One scroll reads, Day 22, Goat breached defenses. Again, you sit beside the scribe. Are these meant to be accurate? He shrugs. Mostly. The afternoon is spent in the observation garden. Yes. The engineers have a garden, where wind chimes of differing metals are hung from bamboo stakes in carefully calculated placements. Each tone, each length, is tuned to interact with specific air currents. We map the wind before we map the enemy. Qian explains. You test one by breathing gently toward it. The sound is almost imperceptible, a single note. Sustained, like a thought trying to take shape. In the far corner of the garden, a new structure is being tested. A collapsible shield wall made from interwoven reeds and lacquered silk. Painted to resemble distant hills. Camouflaged by art. A defensive illusion. Does it work, you ask? Only if they believe in mountains. Qian replies. Dinner tonight is more lively. Steamed buns shaped like tiny towers, filled with garlic chives and mushrooms. A bowl of preserved tofu swimming in sesame oil. Someone has carved a likeness of Commander Tuck into a turnip and placed it on the table as centerpiece. The goat is unimpressed. As dusk falls, the engineers gather for quiet storytelling beneath the hanging lanterns. One woman shares a tale of a siege where defenders used colored kites to mislead scouts about their numbers. Another describes a general who once disguised his entire army as villagers and welcomed the enemy in with tea and dumplings, only to surround them later with nets. You sit back, belly full, brain tingling with strategies you didn't know existed, and realize, none of this is about brute strength. It's about rhythm, it's about patience, it's about seeing war as a last resort, and making sure, if it must come, that it arrives confused and mildly embarrassed. The stars blink into view. Qian passes you a blanket. You'll need rest, he says. Tomorrow's the really strange stuff. You're almost afraid to ask. At first light, you're shaken gently awake, not by the usual bell or woodblock, but by a polite cough and the strong aroma of something fermented. Qian stands at your bedside, holding a shallow wooden tray with a steaming bowl and a folded cloth. Today, he says with far too much cheer, you learn about the siege apothecary. You blink. I thought that meant herbs and salves. He chuckles. That's the least interesting part. The morning lesson takes place in what you'd expected to be a storage cellar. Instead, it's a dim, aromatic labyrinth of jars, bundles, and woven bags, each labeled with meticulous brushwork. A woman named Li Mei leads the session, an herbalist with hands that look stained from a lifetime of brewing things that smell suspiciously like old socks. She begins by handing you a round black pellet. Chew this, she says, slowly. You do. Instantly regret it. Preserved plum, ground mugwort, and powdered ginger, she says with delight. Good for stomach knots and minor betrayal. You grimace. Does it come in dumpling form? Only if you betray someone during dinner. Li Mei then demonstrates the art of scent-based misdirection. Sachets of dried crab shell and mint that mimic the odor of seawater. Used to confuse enemy dogs. A mixture of pine tar and plum vinegar to simulate battlefield rust. Perfect for creating the illusion of mass casualties where none exist. She lights a thin stick of bamboo soaked in mugwort oil and twirls it slowly until the room smells like memory itself. Smell is one of the most persuasive illusions, she says. We've won skirmishes without drawing a single blade. Historians still argue whether these olfactory tactics were battlefield necessities or morale tricks for frightened troops. The records are sparse, often folded between recipes and bathhouse inventories, but the consistency of their mention, across cities and campaigns, suggests a pattern of strange effectiveness. In the next room, you're shown the wall of distractions, a shelf lined with objects used to distract, disorient, or otherwise stall invaders. 1. A bamboo flute tuned to emit a tone that's just slightly off-key, enough to irritate but not enough to identify. 2. A polished bronze disc etched with swirling patterns. When spun in sunlight, it creates a dizzying shimmer. We used to call it the headache maker, says Li Mei fondly. 3. A wooden puzzle box. For spies, Qian explains. We leave it in places they can't resist. Takes 3 days to solve. That's 3 days they're not poisoning wells. Your favorite item is a small clay pig filled with dried beans. When shaken, it squeals. Why? Morale, says Li Mei, deadpan. Later, you help prepare engineer's taste. A blend of ground lentils, ash, and rice starch used to quickly seal leaks in water-based defenses. It smells like regret and glues your fingers together within seconds. You spend 15 minutes trying to separate your thumb from your belt loop. Outside, a few of the younger apprentices are rehearsing siege theater, short plays used to confuse or distract enemy scouts. Today's script? A parody of a rival general known for his overly dramatic speeches. There are wigs involved, and a prop chicken. You ask if this tactic ever worked. Once, says Qian. He surrendered out of embarrassment. You retreat to a shaded corner for lunch. Sour rice balls wrapped in seaweed and a boiled egg dyed blue with herbal tea. Apparently, blue eggs are believed to repel misfortune. They also make your teeth look oddly regal. After lunch, you're assigned to the noise tower, where a team of engineers is testing resonance through hollow bamboo poles. Depending on wind and positioning, The pulls create everything from low murmurs to unearthly howls. The goal? To convince the enemy they are hearing spirits. Or at least really annoyed cranes. Wouldn't they figure it out eventually? You ask? Qian grins. Not if they're already scared. In the distance, the goat responds with a long, tragic bleat, as if offering its services to the spirit choir. You end the day helping Li Mei prepare a batch of drip tea, a calming mix of lotus, orange peel, and shredded parchment that's brewed in secret. She won't say what the parchment contains, only that it's historically significant. As the scent seeps into your clothes and thoughts, you realize the strangeness of it all. This isn't a fortress that prepares for violence. It prepares for patience, for subtlety, for psychological nudges and carefully placed smells. Its defenses are built from scent and rhythm, distraction and silence. Historians might dismiss some of this as embellishment, but as you press a steaming cloth to your face and feel your muscles uncoil, you think maybe the truth doesn't always have to be sharp to be sharp. Qian hands you a tiny sachet of dried plum and ginseng. For later, he says, in case the world gets noisy. You nod, you tuck it into your tunic, and as the sun disappears behind the fortress walls, the chimes in the garden begin their quiet symphony. Not alarms, just reminders. That piece, like siegecraft, is an art that requires maintenance. The next morning greets you with the scent of rice porridge and the low hum of voices in the courtyard. There's a strange tranquility in the air, like the fortress itself has exhaled. You sit beneath a paper lantern awning, watching steam rise from bowls while Qian scribbles diagrams onto a sheet of mulberry paper with a brush so worn it looks more wish than tool. Today's lesson is about walls. Not the tall, gray, shouty kind that scream, keep out, with spikes and archers. But the kind that whisper instead. The Song engineers, true to form, had a knack for making walls that didn't just defend. They listened, they shifted, they adapted. Your first stop is the wall garden, which sounds peaceful until you realize it refers to a test maze of miniature fortifications, each one different in texture, shape, and tilt. You crouch beside one, smooth clay lined with ridged wood. Qian beckons you to knock on it. You do. Now this one, he says, pointing to a moss-covered stone variant nearby. The sound is different. One absorbs, the other echoes. Some walls are meant to carry sound, he explains. Some are meant to eat it. You move on to the water-tested section, where trenches run beneath outer bastions and funnel moisture away from foundations. Apparently, one siege failed entirely because attackers tried to tunnel under the fortress and ended up in a water trap so clever it's still referenced in court poetry. Historians still argue whether that was intentional or just happy plumbing. Qian notes, grinning. Further along the path, you reach the slant wall, a concave structure designed to bounce projectiles skyward instead of letting them smash directly into the stone. It's elegant, mathematical, also, kind of smug-looking. It doesn't fight the rock, says Qian. It talks to him. This becomes the day's theme. Each new demonstration reveals another layer of dialogue, between wall and wind. Between siege and song, there's a wall with hidden compartments meant to amplify flute melodies during ceremonies. Another with built-in bird perches. So no wall ever goes without a morning greeting. One wall has a hollow niche that, when struck, sounds a precise musical note, B sharp. You ask why. So invaders think there's something strange inside. Qian shrugs. Curiosity delays action. There's also a listening wall, thin stone interlaid with stretched silk behind it. When you press your ear against it, you can hear conversations from the courtyard clearly. The science behind it is murky. Magic? Acoustics? Bamboo rumor? Probably both, says Qian. The Song like their answers layered. You're invited to help repair a damaged section, a mundane task involving careful layering of straw, clay, and a sealant paste that smells like fermented tofu and regret. As your hands smear the paste along a gap, an apprentice hands you a thin reed. For whisper lines, they explain. Apparently, certain corridors within the fortress have slanted grooves that carry whispers across vast distances. Whistle in one and someone in a neighboring tower hears it 2 seconds later. Historians still debate if this was intentional. Qian adds, or if someone just got lucky with the acoustics of eavesdropping. Around midday, You sit beneath a sun-shaded canopy while an elder recounts the legend of the laughing wall. According to the tale, during a particularly tense siege, the wall itself began to giggle at night, just faintly, enough to unnerve the enemy. It turned out to be a trapped vent that whistled when the wind hit it just right, but the damage was done. The attackers fled. The defenders composed a ballad. You sip warm barley tea and wonder if modern architects could ever match that kind of flair. After lunch, you're given a brush and some red mineral paint and told to trace protective patterns on a practice slab. The curves are unfamiliar, somewhere between script and sound wave. These are ghost nets, Qian says. They confuse bad energy. You raise a brow. Aren't walls enough? Sometimes. He shrugs. Sometimes the bad energy comes from your own side. You paint. You smudge. You paint again. By the end of the session, your slab is an abstract mess of circles and loops, but Qian nods approvingly. Looks confusing enough, he says. That's half the battle. In the late afternoon, you're invited to observe a ritual called the listening turn. It happens once a week, and it's surprisingly simple. All the fortress's walls are visited in sequence. Not inspected, visited, touched, spoken to. It's believed that walls remember stories, and this habit keeps them from going bitter with silence. You trail behind the group, watching elders press their palms to bricks and whisper brief, unintelligible words. A young apprentice leans toward a corner joint and hums. You ask what they're doing. Giving the walls something to echo. She replies. As evening settles in, the shadows stretch long across the courtyards and the walls begin to glow in the amber light, each surface a different shade. Each brick catching its own reflection. You touch the listening wall one last time and think you can feel a faint warmth beneath your fingers. Maybe it's just the sun. Or maybe, just maybe, it's gratitude. After all, these walls have held stories longer than most people hold grudges. You return to your quarters. Arms sore, fingertips chalky, tunic dotted with specks of mineral dust. Qian passes you a scroll. What's this? Tomorrow, he says, you learn about how we used ducks to defeat a navy. You blink. I have questions. You won't after breakfast, he says, walking off. You stare at the scroll, then at your wall. Please don't start laughing. You whisper, and for a moment, you swear it holds its breath. The morning starts with pancakes. Sorta, thin, eggy crepes made with rice flour, folded and filled with scallion paste, and handed to you by a cook who says, you'll need brain fuel, the ducks are complicated. You blink, nod, and bite into breakfast like someone about to take an unusual history quiz. Which, honestly, isn't far off. Outside, the courtyard is already abuzz. Qian waves you over with a brush tucked behind one ear and a tray of wooden duck carvings under one arm. He gestures toward a small pond on the north side of the fortress. You follow. The Song engineers, he says, were fans of cleverness over confrontation. If a fight could be won with a reed flute and a well-timed sneeze, they preferred that. You nod. This is on brand so far. He places a carved duck gently on the water's surface, where it drifts lazily. So, when river-based warfare became a thing during the Southern Song period, we got creative. He gestures toward a scroll rolled open across a table. It's a battle plan, but instead of arrows and battering rams, it features waves, little swirls, and ducks. Many ducks. You sip your barley tea and brace for explanation. Turns out, the Song Dynasty's engineers developed decoy ducks, light, hollow wooden models weighted at the base and painted to look as realistic as possible. They floated in formation and were often laced with oil or wrapped with thin silk soaked in spices. Why? To fool the enemy navy. Qian says. Sometimes with scent, sometimes with sound, and sometimes, he points to a sketch of a duck with what appears to be a small flame on its back. With mild arson, you raise an eyebrow. One story, Qian continues, claims that the decoys were set afloat at dusk, each trailing a wick soaked in fragrant oil. When the enemy ships approached, they ignited, softly at first, then in waves. The ducks would drift between enemy hulls and light fires in the supply decks, controlled, contained, and somehow elegant. The Song preferred disruption over destruction. Historians still argue whether these flaming ducks were ever used in real combat or just in ceremonial displays. Qian adds, but there are records. and several poets got very excited about them. Your next stop is the duck workshop, a circular room filled with wood shavings, pigments, and half-carved avian decoys in various stages of construction. One artisan, wearing a teal apron streaked with ochre, nods as you enter and hands you a brush. Your turn. You're directed to paint feathers onto the curved back of a duck. The detail work is intricate, each stroke a miniature tribute to camouflage, chaos, and carpentry. It's oddly soothing. Meanwhile, Qian explains how these ducks weren't just for warfare. In peacetime, they were used in parades, in teaching, and even as toys. One satirical play from the 12th century allegedly featured a nobleman whose entire army was replaced by ducks during a dream. Lesson: never ignore engineers. Qian smirks. You laugh, nearly blotting your duck's tail with ink. After lunch, you're invited to observe a reenactment on the fortress moat. Several decoy ducks are set afloat with tiny bells tied to their feet. The breeze picks up, the bells chime, the reflections shimmer. A hush falls across the courtyard. No fire, no warfare, just movement. The ducks drift in slow formation, circling one another like patient thoughts. A child nearby whispers, "It's like they're waiting for something." Another replies, "Maybe they already did it." You lie back in the grass and let the moment stretch. Later in the afternoon, Qian leads you to a covered pavilion lined with scrolls, diagrams, poems, engineering manuals, and sketches of geese-shaped boats. He points to one in particular, a massive float shaped like a winged duck, designed for ferrying messages across battle lines. It was meant to confuse archers. He says, "Who wants to shoot something that looks like it might quack?" He pauses. "Unless you're hungry." You snort. Beneath the scrolls is a collection of metal coins, each stamped with a tiny duck. Commemorative, Qian says, given to siege engineers who showed creativity under pressure. You wonder if there's a modern version. You diffused a tense meeting with a pun. Here's a duck coin. Evening brings a quiet ritual in the duck pond courtyard. A candle is placed inside each wooden decoy and set afloat at dusk. The flickering lights drift gently, casting long reflections that look like whispered messages on water. You're handed one to place yourself. Name it, the artisan tells you. You think for a moment. Detour. You set it adrift. The others chuckle softly. One nods. Good name. As the candles burn lower, a soft flute begins, just a single tone. Held steady, you sit on the stone edge of the pond, your painted duck bobbing silently among its fellows. And let the music carry your thoughts somewhere gently irrelevant. The wind rustles the trees. A frog croaks somewhere unseen. You feel oddly at peace. Tomorrow, Qian says as he passes behind you, we'll talk about bridges. You glance up. Let me guess. Made of silk? Don't be ridiculous. He grins. That was only on Tuesdays. The next morning, you're woken not by birdsong or the usual waft of steamed buns, but by a soft, rhythmic creaking. At first, it sounds like someone slowly opening a very polite door. But as your ears adjust, you realize it's the groan of timber flexing under coordinated weight. Bridges. You remember. Qian mentioned bridges. You shuffle into your slippers, grab your tunic, which still smells faintly of cedar ink, and make your way across the fortress grounds. The bridge yard, apparently, is real, and surprisingly massive. A long rectangular basin lies at the edge of the engineering compound, half filled with water and lined with wooden piers. Across it, men and women in indigo work totes maneuver bundles of rope, beams, and what appear to be large woven mats. Qian greets you with 2 cups of tea. Morning, you've arrived just in time for tactical origami. You sit, nod, and let your eyes follow the action. There's no blueprint on display, no chalk lines, just quiet teamwork and call and response gestures between engineers and carpenters. It's like watching a symphony that smells of sawdust and roasted millet. So, Qian says, motioning toward a length of bundled bamboo. Let's talk floating bridges. You raise an eyebrow. He nods. The Song Dynasty siege engineers weren't just about keeping people out. They were often tasked with getting their own forces in, quietly, quickly, and ideally without getting soaked. And so, they invented the lianchao, interlocking modular bridges made of bamboo, leather lashings, and sometimes even inflated pig bladders. portable, flexible, and floatable. Historians still argue whether the bladder float versions were actually used in wartime. Qian admits, or just tests that happened to work better than expected. Either way, they show up in military treatises and comedic poetry, so they were at least memorable. One assistant gestures for help, and you step in without thinking. You're handed a curved bone needle and a strip of oiled canvas. You help sew 2 lengths of bamboo together, guided by a wrinkled but very patient woman named May, who refers to you only as the teaspoon. Why that name? You ask. She grins. You absorb tea, constantly. Fair. As the morning progresses, a modular bridge begins to take shape. Instead of straight beams, the team uses overlapping arcs, like ribs on a great dragon's back. Once assembled, the whole structure flexes gently over the water, shifting but never sinking. One child walks across it with exaggerated delicacy, arms outstretched like a tightrope walker. You're invited to try. It sways under your feet, but not alarmingly so, more like a friendly shoulder shrugging you along. The bamboo creaks, the canvas tightens. Somewhere behind you, Qian hums a marching tune entirely too upbeat for someone standing on floating architecture. When you step off, you feel weirdly taller. Maybe it's pride, or maybe the pig bladders underneath gave you a little bounce. You're ushered into a shaded tent for lunch, noodles with fermented bean paste, salted cucumbers, and slices of cold poached egg. On the wall hangs a scroll diagram of another famous Song siege bridge, the Philian Chow, named after a wind demon. It was allegedly rigged with fans, pulleys, and weighted silks to float over narrow moats. Historians debate whether it functioned or was just poetic branding. Qian notes, but I choose to believe someone tried to ride the wind into battle like an absolute legend. After lunch, the pace slows. Some of the bridge planks are disassembled, oiled, and stored. Others are tested again. You notice someone carving faint inscriptions into the underside of one board. When asked, they say, "We write wishes," or instructions, or sometimes the names of people we're thinking of. You find a blank plank and scratch your own message into the wood. May all crossings be gentle. Qian watches you from the dock. Not bad, he says, but tomorrow, we try siege ladders. You sigh. Let me guess, they float too? No, he replies, but some had built-in tea holders. You blink. I'm kidding. You're not sure if he is. Evening falls with golden light slanting across the bridge yard. The floating structure, now anchored for rest, reflects the sunset like a watercolor sketch. One by one, the engineers drift away, their boots clacking on the walkways, their hands still stained with dye and ash. You sit for a while on the edge, feet dangling over the water. A fish bumps the surface. A breeze lifts your collar. You wonder how many bridges you've walked in your life without noticing. Then you remember this one, and decide you'll never forget it. You wake the next morning with a slight ache in your shoulders, a not-so-gentle reminder that bamboo is beautiful but not forgiving. The sky is pale and overcast, softening the courtyard into a quiet gray. Qian greets you at the gate holding a curious object, a ladder with hinges. Time for the next experiment, he announces, like someone introducing a stage magician with one trick too many. Siege ladders, but song style. You squint. It looks normal. A ladder. Wood. Rungs. Slightly creaky. Ah, Qian says, reading your expression, but this one folds. And fold it does. Right down the middle like a linen screen. Complete with locking joints and a detachable brace. You're handed a mallet and pointed toward a nearby frame. Time to assemble your own. You kneel beside a bundle of components. Wooden sides. Oak rungs. Bronze pins. And several leather straps that look suspiciously like belt rejects. As you work, Qian explains that Song siege ladders weren't necessarily designed to be flashy, they were designed to be fast. They had to be carried over miles of rough terrain, he says, hammering in a peg, and deployed in seconds. So collapsible tech? Absolutely necessary. You manage to get yours standing, albeit with a slight wobble. May strolls by, pokes it once with a chopstick, and nods. Won't kill anyone. Probably. Encouraging. Qian continues. Song-era siege ladders were sometimes deployed with wheeled frames, like carts with ambition. Others had rope counterweights, which historians still argue about. Some say they helped control descent. Others think it was for style points. You ask whether these ladders were used often. Frequently, he replies, but not always for walls. He leads you to a mural along the courtyard wall. A series of ink panels showing ladders bridging into windows, gates, towers, and occasionally into treehouses. In one recorded incident, he says, an engineer used siege ladders to harvest peaches over enemy lines. You laugh. Seriously? Historians still argue whether it was a strategic morale stunt or someone just really wanted peaches. As the day progresses, you help test several designs. Some fold vertically, some roll. One prototype has tiny spikes that can dig into stone, but May calls it a terrible idea invented by a man who never climbed anything. That one gets quietly retired after the first test leaves splinters and bruised egos. Lunch is early today: sticky rice cakes, pickled radish, and a mildly suspicious fish paste that smells like someone tried to ferment a thunderstorm. You eat it anyway. You're brave now. You built a siege ladder. After the meal, a demonstration begins. Two teams compete to deploy, climb, and retract their ladders in the shortest time. Yours works. Kind of. It folds well, but the top rung snaps under the weight of a particularly enthusiastic test climber. Jian pats your shoulder. Good first draft. You shrug. Still safer than the pig bladder bridge. He laughs. Only just. As evening settles, the group gathers around a table cluttered with sketches and half-carved wooden joints. The conversation turns to defense rather than offense. What if the enemy has better ladders? One apprentice asks. Grease the walls. They replied without missing a beat. Or set the ladders on fire once they're climbing. Classic. Jian grins. Or just build taller walls. The architectural equivalent of rolling your eyes. You sketch a tiny stick figure trying to climb a ladder that keeps folding back on itself. Someone adds a goat to the scene. No one explains why. The fire is lit as twilight deepens. The ladder prototypes are leaned neatly against a side shed. Their silhouettes like half-forgotten poems waiting to be read. You sip from a tin cup filled with hot barley tea, watching the steam spiral upward into the dust. It occurs to you, not for the first time, that these engineers weren't just builders. They were dreamers, precision dreamers, the kind of people who asked, what if, and followed it with, let's try. And sometimes, they tried with bridges, sometimes, with ladders, sometimes, probably, with soup bowls and stubborn goats. You lean back against the bench, your shoulders tired, your fingers splintered, but your mind oddly soothed. Jian raises his cup, to siege ladders, to collapsible dreams. You reply, and the night swallows your laughter like a well-placed rampart. By now, your mornings have taken on a kind of rhythm. Stretch, wince, notice some new ache in your thighs or wrists, and follow the scent of barley porridge to the courtyard. But today feels different. There's a kind of anticipatory quiet in the air, as if even the tiles are holding their breath. Jian greets you with an almost mischievous glint in his eye and a fresh ink smudge across his cheek. That's always a sign something's about to go either very right or very wrong. Today, he says, we talk sound. You blink. Sound? He leads you to the lecture hall, or rather, what passes for one. A covered pavilion with a dozen folding stools and one deeply skeptical-looking goat tied off in the corner. Sieges are loud. Jian begins, gesturing at a bundle of gongs, flutes, and hollow ceramic spears. But the Song engineers also used sound as a tactic. May chimes in as she sets down a long bamboo tube, scaring the enemy, confusing scouts, timing operations, even calming soldiers. One apprentice unfurls a scroll. On it, diagrams of a siege drum built into a mobile cart. An enormous ceramic vessel used to amplify footfalls, and something labeled cloud flute, which looks suspiciously like someone tried to weaponize a wind chime. You are handed a reed whistle. It produces a noise that can best be described as a duck with regrets. Perfect. May nods approvingly. We'll need more of those. You spend the morning building sonic contraptions, hollow clay jars to magnify resonance, vibrating bronze plates that hum when struck, and paper kites with string-mounted whistles meant to howl across enemy encampments. Apparently, one Song general used those kites during night attacks not to cause damage, but to disrupt sleep. Historians still argue whether that was psychological warfare. Jian says, Adjusting the tension on a flute string device. Or just petty genius. The goat sneezes, as if in agreement. After lunch, radish dumplings and a plum sauce that tastes slightly like vinegar-soaked dreams. You test your creations in a nearby echo chamber, a circular courtyard designed to reflect and magnify sound. Every engineer brings something different. One reed pipe rig plays a haunting 4-note phrase. Another emits a bassy drone that rumbles in your chest like thunder trapped in a teacup. May sets off a sequence of ceramic chimes hung from a bamboo frame. And the wind carries their tune high into the rafters, where it seems to hum along after they've stopped moving. Then it's your turn. You've cobbled together a simple string and drum contraption, and when struck, it gives off a syncopated, off-kilter rhythm, awkward. Yes, but oddly hypnotic. Qian claps once, perfectly unsettling. By evening, the sound arsenal is ready. Someone proposes a simulation. A fake siege where the defenders use noise instead of arrows. The courtyard becomes a battlefield of echoes. Drums pound, whistles shriek, your awkward rhythm bumps along like a limping parade float. Shadows dance on the walls as the sun sets. And for a moment, it's easy to imagine how disorienting all this would feel in the chaos of real combat. You crouch behind a wooden shield, clutching your whistle like a ceremonial talisman. Is it working? You ask Qian, who's half hidden behind a noise-amplifying clay pot. Oh, absolutely, he says. I have no idea what's going on. Someone sets off a thunderjaw, a sealed ceramic vessel filled with pebbles and pressure. The resulting boom sends birds scattering from the roof. The goat faints. Qian gives a satisfied nod. We'll call that one highly effective. May adds, we should really warn the kitchen staff next time. You help carry the instruments back into the storehouse. Each one still humming faintly with vibration. Your arms ache, your ears ring, but your mind hums with fascination. It's not just about destruction. You realize, it never was. Song Dynasty siege engineers build weapons. Yes, but they also built confusion, expectation, delay. They tuned the battlefield like an instrument and let it sing. Howl, whimper, or lull, depending on the moment. Do you think anyone ever wrote music for war? You ask out loud. Qian, already half asleep with his back against a barrel of discarded chimes, mumbles, if they didn't, they missed a good story. The stars come out one by one. Somewhere, a breeze lifts a forgotten paper kite. And for a brief moment, the whistle still attached catches the wind and lets out a low, fluttering call. It sounds almost like a song. And as you lie down near your folded tunic, nestled beside a hollow drum that still echoes your heartbeat, you can't help but wonder. Maybe the best sieges didn't shout. Maybe they whispered. Morning brings with it the metallic scent of dew on copper. And a distinct echo from the south courtyard. Someone's already practicing. You stretch, crack your shoulders, and shuffle toward the commotion, only to find a group of apprentices trying to synchronize a water clock with a series of mechanical gongs. Yes, that's right. Today, it's all about timing. Qian, now fully committed to the bedraggled genius aesthetic, explains with 2 brushes sticking out of his bun. A siege isn't just brute force, it's choreography. Every lever, pulley, and sling must move like a sentence in a poem. May unfurls a scroll filled with diagrams that look more like music notation than battle plans. You spot marks denoting rockfall intervals, smoke burst sync, and something called turtle formation delay cue. The complexity is dizzying. Historians still debate how much of this was actually used. She says, some believe it was more aspirational, like medieval jazz. Others think it was obsessively timed, minute by minute. Today, you're joining the interval team, whose job is to orchestrate a theoretical battle scenario using entirely non-lethal means. Think, colored smoke flows, synchronized drum calls, and clay discs flung through hoops. It's part military drill, part avant-garde theater. The crew begins by calibrating a giant artillery spear, the kind used for tracking stars. But here, repurposed as a fancy countdown timer. One apprentice mutters, I signed up to learn catapults. Not interpretive astronomy, but keep winding gears anyway. You're handed a small clay tablet etched with the symbol of wait. That's your job, apparently. Hold, observe, and then trigger a blue smoke plume precisely 47 seconds after the gong rings. Simple enough, Except the gong rings, and you panic, and forget which pouch holds the blue smoke and which one holds maize lunch, steamed eggplant wrapped in lotus leaf. In the end, you trigger something that smells faintly delicious but confuses everyone. New tactic, Qian says, nodding, aromatic delay. It becomes clear how vital timing was for Song siege teams, not just to attack, but to coordinate construction, disguise movements, and rotate tired soldiers. You learn that some siege engineers even timed their weapon-building efforts to align with lunar cycles. The moon's light wasn't just romantic, it dictated when they could carve, dry, and test new materials. Also, Jian adds, some folks just really hated working in the dark. Midday brings a break. You sit with Mei and another apprentice beneath a sunshade woven from reeds and silk scraps. Someone plays a soft tune on a guzheng in the background, and you realize something. This place may train for war, but it feels suspiciously like a music conservatory crossed with a science fair. Back in action, your team rehearses a simulated ladder ambush. The idea? Build a rhythm, smoke burst, whistle call, fake retreat, surprise confetti. You assume that last one is just a Qian flourish. This time, you're in sync. The blue smoke bursts on cue. The drums match your footsteps. One of the apprentices even shouts something inspiring. And then, just when the enemy thinks the rhythm is predictable, you skip a beat. Not a mistake, a message. You have to leave space. Mei explains afterward. For doubt, for silence. That's how you get in their heads. You're beginning to see how all this, drums, kites, smoke, intervals, isn't about spectacle. It's about control, not over people, necessarily, but over time, over perception, over the invisible thread that ties one heartbeat to another. It reminds you of the tunics you helped sew. How their patterns told stories only if you moved at just the right speed. How stillness, just like timing, could become strategy. Qian shows you one last contraption before sunset. A rotating drum tower that can trigger bells, flags, and even water sprays, all perfectly timed with a single pull of a lever. It's a siege, he says, but also a performance. Historians still argue whether any of these mechanisms were ever deployed at full scale. Mei adds, but you can't deny, they thought of everything. That evening, back in your sleeping nook, you scribble a few diagrams of your own. A pulley here, a smoke cue there, and one note that simply reads, pause longer than feels natural. Because maybe the Song engineers weren't just military thinkers. Maybe they were composers. And when the world felt loud and fractured, they answered with rhythm, with silence, with intervals that forced everyone, friend and enemy alike, to listen more closely. You wake to a faint rustle, someone adjusting silk robes, or maybe folding paper. It's early, but the engineers are already bustling. Today's lesson? Camouflage and decoys. You squint. Siege warfare and stealth? Aren't these people supposed to be lobbing flaming rocks from dragons' mouths? Mei waves you over to a courtyard cluttered with peculiar models. Folding screens painted with bamboo forests. Life-sized straw soldiers. And a few peculiar bundles that look suspiciously like dumplings until one blinks. Not dumplings. Fake soldiers, she says, and decoy armaments. The Song Dynasty was full of them. You're put to work weaving reeds into vaguely helmet-shaped domes, which, when stuck on poles, mimic an advancing troop. The effect from a distance is uncanny, and funny, especially when a breeze causes your dummy army to waltz in unison. Qian arrives late, munching on something fried, and nods approvingly. Historians still argue whether these dummies ever caused full retreats. Some believe they were more psychological. Others say they were simply a stall tactic. Meanwhile, another team is preparing painted screens to hide entire camps. You help stretch dyed silk across lightweight bamboo frames. The trick is to paint scenes of calm nature, willows, rivers, distant mountains, so enemy scouts see nothing threatening. You're handed a brush and a jar of ochre and told to add subtle menace to this pine tree. You're not sure how to do that, so you give it a very suspicious brand. While the decoys drop, the crew demonstrates a classic Song misdirection maneuver, the inverted footprint tap. By strapping carved soles onto boots, soldiers could make it look like they were retreating when they were actually advancing. Does it work, you ask? Mei shrugs. Only if the enemy's tracking carefully. But then again, that's the point. camouflage wasn't just visual, it was auditory. You're shown a curious setup involving hollow boards suspended by threads. When struck by the breeze, they emit subtle moaning tones. Qian grins, frightened more than a few superstitious scouts with that one. There's even talk of using trained birds, magpies and crows, to carry shiny metal bits into enemy camps at night, causing clinks and flickers that trigger false alarms. Historians still argue if this was practical or poetic nonsense. May says, as she coaxes a magpie off her stroll. The afternoon's most peculiar assignment involves helping Qian lay out a shadow corridor. By placing tall stakes and hanging strips of gauze in just the right way, they create false silhouettes when backlit by torches. To an observer on the other side of the river, it looks like a whole army's milling about, even though it's just a very creative laundry line. You test it out. From the viewing ridge, the scene does look dramatic, swaying figures, looming heads, even what appears to be a drummer. But the drummer is just a wobbling laundry tub with a frog inside it. You didn't put it there. You spend the rest of the day tweaking angles, adjusting shadows, and resisting the urge to turn the whole thing into a puppet theater. Someone does anyway. The battle of the Turnip King versus General Celery debuts at sunset to modest applause and one confused goat. But behind the joke, something lingers. These weren't distractions just for the enemy. They were comforts for the self. Ways to turn fear into theater. Ways to say, we still have control, even if it's just over where the moonlight falls or how the wind catches a sleeve. You begin to see the artistry behind every diversion. Each bamboo screen, each reed dummy, each ridiculous silhouette. They work. In a way, the song engineers lullabies, stories whispered to their own soldiers. Rest. We thought of everything, even tricks. You retire for the evening to a tent partially camouflaged with dried lotus leaves. Qian insists the sound is calming. It is not. It sounds like you're sleeping inside a popcorn popper. But as you lie back and listen to the breeze shift across your makeshift army of straw men and suspicious pine trees, you can't help but feel oddly secure. Because in this world, every detail matters, even the silly ones. Especially the silly ones. The morning air is dense with mist and mischief. As you stretch and shuffle toward breakfast, rice congee with exactly one suspiciously cheerful preserved egg, you're immediately handed a rolled map and a wooden stylus. May's voice is chipper. Today, we build a false fortress. You blink. A fake fortress? Yes, she says, already walking away. And we have 3 hours. What follows is equal parts military rehearsal and theater production. The objective? Construct the illusion of a heavily fortified base along a nearby hilltop. Real enough to fool scouts. Light enough to pack up by sunset. You're sent up a slope with teams of engineers. Baskets of reeds, bundles of silk, and armloads of painted boards. The terrain is rocky but manageable, except for one stubborn goat who refuses to yield the flattest patch. Qian attempts diplomacy via apple core. It works. Mostly. Your job begins with laying the base grid, rope markers staked down to give the illusion of symmetrical planning. Historians still argue whether these mock bases were ever mistaken for the real thing. Qian says, drawing a flawless crenellation sketch on a tree trunk, but even hesitation from the enemy was a victory. Light scaffolding goes up fast, masked with canvas dyed in gray and brick red stripes. You paint arrow slits with a single brush dipped in both black and indigo. The effect is shockingly convincing, until someone accidentally leans on a wall and topples a third of the battlements into a bush. The bush seems fine with it. Meanwhile, another crew creates rows of imitation weaponry. Ballistae made from bent reeds, dummy catapults built over baskets, and spears crafted from broom handles and feathered twine. You even rig up a decoy fire beacon using fish oil and a mirrored bowl. Qian grins. Just enough smoke to imply threat. Not enough to cook anything. By midday, the illusion is complete. From the valley below, it looks like a modest but well-defended outpost. High towers, taut walls, sentries pacing. You know they're just straw men in conical hats. But still, they command a presence. You're ushered to a lookout platform with May. She offers you a slice of candied ginger and a viewing lens. Now imagine you're an invading scout. She says. You squint. From this angle, the base looks completely plausible. Even the goat, now perched on the highest tower, seems like a dedicated guardian. It's impressive, and a little ridiculous. But that's the charm. It's not just about tricking the enemy. May continues. It's about buying time, confusing plans, giving your real forces a moment to breathe. And here's the odd part. Breathing is exactly what you find yourself doing. Slowly, deeply, as though the absurdity itself has cleared a little space in your chest. Lunch is served from behind a false wall. Steamed buns and salted radish pass through a sliding panel painted to look like stone. It's both tasty and theatrical. You try not to laugh with your mouth full. In the afternoon, you join a sub-team adding wares to the fortress. Faded patches, bird droppings, simulated, thank goodness, lopsided banners. No real fort is pristine. Someone says, make it believable. You add a spider web between two poles with white horsehair. May gives it an approving nod. Someone else installs a wooden warning gong that, when struck, emits the unmistakable tone of a soup ladle bouncing off a wash basin. May frowns at this but ultimately lets it stand. Authenticity is relative, she mutters. By dusk, the fog thickens. The fortress seems to deepen in dimension, shadows lengthen, outlines blur, and torchlight flickers from inside hollow towers. You sit on a nearby rock and take it all in. It's silly, it's fake, it's glorious, and yet, a part of you understands something ancient and profound. Even false walls can offer real comfort. Even imagined bastions can protect. As the engineers begin their dismantling, methodical, quiet, like monks unrolling a mandala, you're asked to carry down a stack of folded arrow slings. You do so gently, like relics. Qian pats your shoulder. Tomorrow we build real things again. But today, we danced with illusion, and made it sing. Back at camp, you find someone's placed a small model of the fake fortress beside your bedroll. Just a thumb-sized version, made of twigs and thread. You turn it in your hand and smile. Even stories made of scaffolding can hold weight. Even shadows can shelter. You rise the next morning with a tangle of dreams still caught in your hair. Something about flying ladders and a goat disguised as a general. The air is thick with the scent of steamed dumplings and wet lacquer. Today, you're told, is Echo Drill Day. No one explains. You're led to a narrow canyon just outside the city's western walls which, you now know, are surprisingly climbable if you're holding a wicker tray full of sticky rice and regret. The canyon is naturally curved, creating an acoustic loop. That's the point. The engineers have rigged it with gong stands, drum platforms, and rows of hollow boards hanging from tree limbs. One elder taps a chord and the sound bounces like a pebble across a pond. This, May whispers beside you, is how we turn silence into a weapon. The goal of the echo drill is to learn how sound behaves in battle, how to mask it, mimic it, and, when needed, weaponize it. Song engineers, you're told, were masters of auditory illusion. They used decoy horns, misdirecting echoes, and rhythm drills to confuse enemy formations. Historians still argue whether these tactics ever altered the outcome of a siege. Qian says, handing you a mallet, but we know one thing for sure, it really messes with goats. You eye the goat at the edge of the canyon. It stares at you like it remembers yesterday's catapult incident. The drill begins with a set of silence beats, tapping low-frequency rhythms on dampened drums. The sound barely registers, but you can feel it, vibrating your boots. Then come the layered echoes, tiny taps and clicks played in specific sequence so the returning echoes create a whole new rhythm when heard from afar. It's less music and more auditory sleight of hand. At one point, a group sets off a burst of coordinated shouting, each voice tuned to a different pitch. The result is a warbling chorus that seems to come from nowhere and everywhere. The goat bolts. Success, says May. You take your turn. At first, your beats come too fast, overlapping awkwardly, but then you fall into the groove. 3 strikes. One pause. One echo. The sound loops back with perfect delay. Qian nods. You've got ear tempo. The next exercise is the ghost command. You hide behind a rock ledge and call out a phrase. May's chosen line is, they've breached the south gate, which bounces between the canyon walls. Arriving at the mock battlements with eerie realism, soldiers up top pretend to panic. One drops a helmet, another faints with theatrical flair. Of course, Qian adds, In real sieges, misdirected noise could cost lives. That's why these drills matter. You spend the afternoon rehearsing formations that rely on auditory cues instead of visual ones. When to run, when to stop, when to release a countermeasure. It's part game, part meditation, and a little bit of martial poetry. During a break, you and May shared candied chestnuts and lean against the canyon wall. She tells you how Song commanders would sometimes seed bamboo tubes filled with dried beans into enemy camps. Rattles that would sound like approaching cavalry when kicked. Sometimes, the suggestion of a charge is more terrifying than the real thing. She says. You nod, remembering the fake fortress. So much of this is about suggestion. Exactly, she says. Sieges aren't just muscle and mind. They're performance. You stare, you stall, you shape the space. By sundown, the engineers lead one final demonstration, the Ghost Army. It's a slow march of reed-armored figures, each tied to a long rope. As the sun sets, they're pulled from behind a ridge, casting elongated shadows that resemble an advancing line of soldiers. Gongs sound behind the ridge. Echoes rebound. For a moment, even you, knowing the trick, feel your heart quicken. Then someone sneezes, and one reed soldier topples, taking 3 others down like melodramatic dominoes. Still, the effect lingers. That night, you eat beneath a trellis of lanterns. The goat, having forgiven the canyon incident, rests near your feet. Chewing on something that looks suspiciously like an instruction scroll. You glance up at the stars and think about sound. How it travels. How it lingers. How even a false signal can stir real emotion. You remember the canyon echoes. The way one voice, placed just right, could seem like an army. And as you pull your blanket tight and the crickets begin their own night drill, you wonder how many battles had turned on whispers. How many victories were won with a well-timed echo. Dawn arrived without fuss. Just a gentle brightening behind the workshop shutters and the slow scent of tea steeping beside your bedroll. You stretch, your joints politely cracking in protest, and shuffle outside to find the camp already abuzz with quiet purpose. No drums, no battle cries, just engineers folding scaffolds and coiling ropes. The rhythm of routine humming like a low lullaby. Today is disassembly day, and it's oddly lovely. There's something soothing about taking things apart when you understand how they were made. You start with a pulley station, once used to hoist decoy banners and oversized clay jars filled with nothing but air and imagination. The ropes are worn but lovingly knotted. You unthread them slowly, carefully, like unbraiding someone's hair after a long festival. Qian appears beside you with a half-eaten rice bun and a scroll. Do you want the diagram or the improvisation version? You raise an eyebrow. Thought so, he says, pocketing the scroll and handing you the rice bun. Elsewhere, the wooden gears from the fake siege tower are being dismantled and sorted by size. Not because they must be, but because Song engineers couldn't abide chaos, not even in cleanup. Historians still debate whether these camps were built with dismantling in mind. Qian mutters, balancing a cartwheel on one shoulder. Or if that's just what happens when you train 1,000 people to care about how a lever sings. You're assigned to the deconstruction of the false battering ram. It looks aggressive from a distance, iron tips. Plain black ends, but it's surprisingly elegant up close. Hollow frame, weighted joints, a sound chamber carved into the core. May explains that it was designed not to break walls but to sound like it could. You'd be amazed what fear does with half the evidence. She says, unscrewing a bolt with her teeth. Don't try that at home. As the structure collapses in stages, you uncover notes scribbled in charcoal along the beams. Jokes, quick calculations. One message just says, tell Shu to stop borrowing my rope. Even the fake siege ladders have history. You help fold and stack them beside the carpentry tents, where junior engineers are being rewarded with candied hawthorn for remembering which ladder belonged to which illusion. Mid-morning brings a moment of pause. Someone finds a wooden slat shaped vaguely like a duck and insists it was part of a decoy unit known as the Foul Regiment. May snorts lights out of her nose laughing. You suggest adding bells and deploying them as a musical distraction. Too late. Qian sighs. Someone already proposed a gong geese strategy last month. The laughter is quiet, shared, sun-dappled. You realize that for all the precision and planning, Song engineers left plenty of room for joy, for playful absurdity. for weird little ducks in battle armor. After lunch, rice, pickled cabbage, and sesame sweets. You're shown the map sack, a linen pouch embroidered with concentric spirals. It contains the sketches of every configuration this camp ever used. Not blueprints, not official plans, just doodles, really, but meaningful, because someday, May says, someone else will build from these ideas, even if they never see this place. You nod, holding a scrap of parchment that shows a siege tower on stilts. Wheels replaced with chicken legs. This one serious? Not even a little. She grins. But you keep it anyway. As the sun begins its golden descent, the final act begins, the fold. The camp collapses inwards like a flower going to sleep. Tents vanish. Rope lines are rewound. Painted tarps are folded, their ink-stained wrinkles still bearing the suggestion of shadows. Someone gathers all the leftover wooden pegs and stores them in a basket labeled, maybe. You like that. Before you leave, May places something in your hand, a single wooden dowel, carved with shallow ridges and painted a soft russet. From the tower's left leg, she says, in case you ever want to build your own nonsense. You hold it like a relic. And maybe it is. That night, as the stars return and the last of the campfire's gutter low, you sit cross-legged near the place where the catapult once stood. There's no sign it was ever there. Just a slight depression in the grass and a goat sleeping directly where the trebuchet pivot had been. Of course, you watch Qian balance a lantern on his head for no reason other than comic principle. May throws a pebble at him and misses by a league. And somewhere behind you, a junior engineer softly hums the rhythm from Echo Drill Day, 3 beats. One pause, one echo. It loops gently in your chest. Not loud, but enough. You roll the dowel between your fingers. Feel the ridges, and imagine the next ridiculous invention waiting quietly in the back of your mind. And in that moment, you're no longer just a visitor to the siege camp. You're part of the fold. The last morning doesn't feel like a last anything. There's no farewell toast, no procession of engineers lining up to salute your departure. Just the same calm rhythm, ropes coiled, wagons loaded, rice steaming. If not for the steadily shrinking size of the camp, you might think the siege never ended, or never began. You wake to the soft crinkle of your blanket, the smell of sweet bean paste buns, and the dull thud of someone attempting to fold a very stubborn map. Qian is muttering something about a compass that points mostly south unless you ask nicely. You sit up, rubbing your eyes, and for a moment, you wonder if you imagined it all, if the goat was real. If the echo drills happened, if the fortress really shivered when the engineers hummed. Then you find the russet dowel in your tunic pocket, still warm from the sun. So, probably real. The engineers are preparing for a new assignment, not a siege this time. But a construction survey somewhere upriver. A bridge maybe, or a floating tea house for spies. It's not clear. Nobody seems too worried about the details yet. You wander toward the edge of camp, where May is adjusting the straps on a supply mule wearing an oversized sun hat. I thought you didn't believe in goodbyes. You say, I don't, she replies, but I believe in packing snacks. Here, she hands you a wrapped bundle that smells suspiciously like pickled turnip and mischief. Thanks, you say, already planning to trade it for sesame candy. Qian joins you, holding a lopsided scroll case made of bamboo and stubborn optimism. This is for you. You accept it cautiously. Inside, he explains, is a collection of absolutely untested, highly ill-advised siege concepts, including, but not limited to, the firework-propelled shield sled and the reverse ladder trampoline. You nod solemnly. I will treasure these plans, and immediately destroy them. He grins, as one should. Nearby, someone starts playing a bamboo flute. Badly, the tune warbles like a confused goose. The goat bleats in solidarity. The camp breaks apart like a well-rehearsed dream. Tents vanish. Paths fade. The goat is gently encouraged toward a different army. One more tolerant of nap invasions. You begin your own path home. But you're not alone. You carry sketches, smells, sounds, fragments stitched into your memory with invisible thread. The siege that never wanted to hurt anything. The catapults that whispered. The ladders that gestured politely rather than stormed. The way Song engineers made even war feel like a study in patience, resonance, and noodle logistics. You walk for hours, sometimes alone, sometimes joined by migrating peasants. Sometimes just the wind humming against your ear like a leftover echo. Mid-afternoon, you reach a small stone bridge, narrow, moss-draped, entirely disinterested in your emotional state. You cross slowly. At the center, you pause. Unwrap the bundle May gave you. Inside, not turnip, but sesame candy. A page of notes written in water-soluble ink, already smudging. And one extra dowel, heel streak. Spiral knot. Humming faintly if you tilt it just so. You close your eyes. And smile. Historians still argue whether the song engineer's legacy was military or philosophical. Some say their true weapon was efficiency. Others argue it was empathy, quietly encoded in timber frames and lever systems. But most agree on this: they built for a world they hoped would someday stop needing siege engines. You tuck the teal dowel next to the russet one. 2 tools, 2 stories, and your tunic, stitched with echoes and scroll dust and a certain goat-smelling confidence. Flutters in the breeze like it has one final siege to dream up. You hum a single note. It echoes back, then fades. And now, let's begin your wind down. The bridge beneath you softens into shadow as dusk drapes its lavender hush across the world. Your breath slows, matching the rhythm of the river below, a steady murmur. Not rushing, not stalling, just continuing. You sit down, tunic wrapped around your shoulders like a story folded into fabric. The dowels rest gently in your lap, their notches catching the last glint of sun. The wind quiets. The hum returns, fainter now, tucked beneath your ribs like a secret. You no longer need it to be loud. You remember it. Close your eyes. Let your fingers uncoil. Let your thoughts settle like sediment in calm water. The siege is over. The scrolls are written. The goat is, mercifully, someone else's problem now. And you? You're where you need to be. In the hush. In the fold between wood and word. Sleep well. End of script. Sweet dreams.